So this is my presentation on self-diagnosis online. Okay, so this is my table of contents. First, I'm just going to go over the definition and then the reason why people might self-diagnose and then effects that it has. And the fourth part is a little different than self-diagnosing, but it's kind of on the same lines, and that is when people fake disorders.
Interesting.
So, introduction. Before technology was widespread and the internet was available to many, people had to go to the doctor's office in order to get diagnosed. But now people can easily search up their symptoms and use online symptom checkers in order to diagnose themselves. So this kind of just explains why self-diagnosis is much more prevalent in today's society because of easy access to the internet. So first, what is self-diagnosis? So dictionary.com defines self-diagnosis as the diagnosis of one's own malady or illness. It's kind of in the name, but definitions.net also says self-diagnosis is the process of diagnosing or identifying medical conditions in oneself. And Oxford Languages says diagnose oneself as having a particular medical condition. So pretty much every source kind of agrees with each other that self-diagnosis is basically when you as yourself, not a medical practitioner, you don't really have a medical background, you're not like a professional or anything, but you decide that you're going to diagnose an illness for yourself. So now let's talk about why people might self-diagnose. So why would you want to search up your symptoms? People will often search up their symptoms online just to calm themselves down and kind of like calm down their nerves or the anxiety. So they could be very anxious about what they have, and doing a quick search about their symptoms can relieve some of that anxiety. So if they have like a headache and they search it up and it just tells them something pretty minute, they might be like, okay, good, maybe I'll just sleep and this will be gone. It's not that serious. So that can help with that anxiety. Another reason is that they might want to prepare for a doctor's appointment in the future. So if they are feeling a little sick, they can search up their symptoms, and then with the list of disorders that comes up, they can kind of research a little bit about each one. And so when they go to the doctor's office, they already have like a list of questions prepared to ask the doctor, and they don't have to come up with things on the spot, because sometimes when you do get diagnosed by a doctor, it also gives you a lot of anxiety because like right there on the spot, you figure out you kind of have a problem with your health. But if you already were able to prepare a list of questions, you can kind of help relieve that anxiety by asking the correct questions to your doctor. Additionally, some doctors aren't the best at reducing their medical jargon into everyday normal people language. And so if you do some research by yourself before, because you've already kind of like searched up your symptoms, you might be able to better understand what they're trying to tell you. Curiosity, so if they're just curious what they might have, they can do a quick search and figure it out. And then the last one is kind of interesting. So some people can't afford healthcare, and so now that they can access the internet, they've started using the internet as their primary physician, which is not a good thing at all. It's okay to search up your symptoms and try to figure out what you have, but the internet should not be your primary physician. Like, do not only depend on the internet to diagnose yourself. So effects, both positive and negative, of this action. So the positive effects are that it allows people to get professional help. So once you do look at your symptoms online, you might realize that you actually do have a problem. Before, you might have thought it was just a common cold, and so you were staying at home trying to treat it yourself with cough drops and stuff. But when you search up your symptoms and you figure out that it might be a little bit more severe, then you're prompted to go to the doctor's office and get real help. So that can be a positive. Another positive is, of course, the increase of health information access. So the internet is allowing more people to access this information that they might not have previously had. And the last thing is similar to the first. It identifies risks or signs of need for further medical attention. So once they search up their symptoms and they realize something might be wrong, they now have identified these risks and signs, and they can go in for an actual doctor appointment to get diagnosed by a real professional. Unfortunately, there are more negative effects than positive effects about self-diagnosing. And the first thing is that anyone can edit the websites and input inaccurate information. So there's 70,000 websites boasting information related to health. So that means that there's a large database of medical knowledge at anybody's fingertips. But the thing is that anyone can really edit these websites, even people that don't have a professional degree, a medical degree. So all this information might be inaccurate. And because of this, it can be difficult to find the source of the information. So when you're looking online, you might not know where the information is coming from, and then that's kind of how you get misinformation. So a study was done and it showed that only 9% of websites actually offered parents accurate information when they were trying to treat their children for fevers. So this just proves how bad misinformation is in healthcare online. Um, and then the second thing is incorrect treatments. This is one of the worst things that can happen due to a misdiagnosis. So if you were searching up your symptoms online and you diagnose yourself with the wrong thing, something that you don't actually have, and you start a treatment for it, because a lot of treatments you can get from a pharmacy without a medical prescription, that can actually be very, very harmful if you have just like ingested the wrong chemicals and stuff. So that's a very big thing. And then the last negative effect is the medical jargon can be confusing and hard to understand. And so if you don't fully understand what a website is trying to tell you, you can confuse any of the information, take incorrect treatments, all of that stuff. So it's very similar. And a website actually said that the English medical websites generally require high school level or greater reading ability to understand them. And so a lot of people that search up their symptoms might not have that level of education. And so that's very dangerous for them to be doing that. So this is an example of something that might happen. So a person experiences headaches and they decide to search up their symptoms. And the internet says that it could either be caffeine withdrawal or brain tumors. So of course the person is going to panic and believe either diagnosis. And what people might not know is that caffeine withdrawal is actually very severe. Even though it's common, it's actually very severe. And so with either of these diagnoses, the person is obviously going to panic because they either think they have a brain tumor or they think they have caffeine withdrawal. And so the person might follow through with the indicated treatment plan and schedule a doctor's appointment. If they follow through with the indicated treatment plan and they had misdiagnosed themselves, that's already very dangerous for them. But if they do decide to schedule a doctor's appointment, the treatment that they chose was wrong. So now the person is in a worse condition and they also have to spend a lot of money getting that healthcare appointment. So there's actually been studies showing that that self-diagnosing is kind of harming people's finances because they keep having to schedule a doctor's appointment when all they really had was a headache. They didn't have a brain tumor, they didn't have caffeine withdrawal, but they just got so scared because the internet is telling them all these things that they actually might have it. And so they're like, oh my God, do I have this? They quickly went to the doctor's appointment and they kind of just like waste their money. At least they reassure themselves that they don't, but if they are doing this for every single symptom that they have, that's a lot of money that they're using. So the last part about mine is faking disorders. So on TikTok, a lot of people I've seen are faking disorders. Recently, there's been a surge of people faking DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. And so that's when people pretend that they have multiple personalities, and it's actually a real disorder, but a lot of people are faking it, and that can be really harmful. And this is a video of two girls that were faking Tourette's, which is a disorder where people get tics uncontrollably, and they were just making fun of the disorder.
He's kinda quiet, but his body ain't. Spent the
So the video goes on, that boy interrupts them and explains how what they're doing is really harmful, but I just wanted to show what they were actually doing because it's actually all over TikTok, and it's super harmful because they're representing Tourette's syndrome in a way that it's not in actuality. So they're just like dancing around and they're randomly like going like that. And so that's how they're painting the picture of Tourette's, when in actuality Tourette's is really, really harmful and it's uncontrollable. So they're able to control their movements, and so it kind of feels like they're mimicking people who have Tourette's. And Tourette's is actually super um, painful as well. And some of the tics some people have, like they start banging their heads, they say things they didn't want to. And so it can be really, really harmful when people just start to pretend that they have it. Okay, and then there's actually a disorder called Munchausen syndrome, and this is when people try to get attention and sympathy by falsifying, inducing, and or exaggerating an illness. So this is different from what we might what might be known to us like malingering, which is faking an illness to get out of work. And we all may have had an experience where we pretended to be sick so we didn't have to go to school. But Munchinson syndrome is much, much different. So people who have this will go as far as to undergo surgeries and procedures in order to get the sympathy that people who actually have those illnesses get. And it's so dangerous that people will even give themselves these symptoms so that they can pretend to have it. They'll harm themselves, they'll add blood in their urine. Other things that people do are use rubber bands to cut off circulation to certain limbs. They cut, burn themselves, poison themselves, reopen wounds, eat contaminated food. Like they harm themselves just so that they can get attention for then having some type of disorder. So obviously this is really, really bad because they're putting themselves at risk, but not only are they putting themselves at risk, they're also putting other people at risk. So there's different versions of Munchinson. There's one called Munchinson syndrome by proxy, and that means that instead of pretending that they're sick, they will pretend that people they're living with or people they're caring for are sick. And so then they're like family members or whoever they're pretending for, they are now going through all of this. And so instead of doing it to themselves, they're doing it to someone else. And then another version is by internet. And this is when people will pretend, so it's all online, so it's easier for them to pretend they have an illness. And so they'll join these support groups where people who actually do have the illness are like talking to themselves and kind of getting support with each other. But they'll join these groups, and then when the group does figure out that they were just faking, they feel really hurt and betrayed. And so they might leave their groups, and that causes them to lose the support that they actually needed. So Munchinson syndrome is really bad, and faking disorders is really harmful to not only yourself, but your family and people just on the internet that you might be interacting with, or people who might see that you're faking. And then self-diagnosing mental disorders is also very harmful. So first things similar to just normal, but if you misdiagnose something, your situation can get worse if you start using the wrong treatment, or just nothing can happen. So now you've just wasted time in which if you had actually gone to the doctors, you could have gotten treatment that would have started helping better you, but you've just kind of stayed stable. So one thing, especially for depression, if you misdiagnose yourself, time will pass. And if you're not doing the correct things to treat your depression, um, usually when depression becomes severe, it turns into suicidal thoughts and psychosis. And so we really, really want to prevent that. So it's best to get diagnosed by a medical doctor, psychologist, therapist, anything like that, anyone with a degree, so that you can start the correct treatment right away. And then something else is, if you depression symptoms often mimic other physical conditions. So, like thyroid disorder and heart disease can mimic or produce depressive symptoms. So, if someone believes that they have clinical depression based on their own self diagnosis, they can actually miss an underlying heart condition, which can lead to heart attacks, stroke, and death. So, this is very, very serious. So, if you do think that you have depression, it's best to get diagnosed because you might actually not have depression. You might have thyroid disease or a heart disease. So these diseases actually have very similar symptoms, and online symptom checkers might not be able to distinguish the difference because what real doctors do is they can notice these subtle nuances and different like mannerisms in your behavior, and that's how they can tell if you actually have depression or if you have a thyroid disease disorder. But the internet obviously is not looking at you. They can't really see how you're feeling, so they will not be getting the perfect diagnosis. And then also, sometimes cancerous brain tumors can cause people to experience psychological symptoms. So, if they have depression and if they assume they have depression and they begin to treat that, then their brain tumor is going to continue to grow. So, even though they've kind of like helped their depression, their actual brain tumor in their brain is like kind of growing, and that poses a risk to their life. So, the ultimate risk when people face when self diagnosing any type of mental health disorder, not only depression, is permanent disability and maybe even death. So, this is very similar to something else. So, many women on their cycle might have really bad cramps. And so sometimes when they actually have like a cyst or ovarian cancer, they just assume they're having really bad cramps and they don't go to the doctors, and when they actually do, their actual condition has gotten much worse. So, whenever you do feel pain or you feel uncomfortable or you feel like your health is not in prime condition, it's always best to go to the doctor rather than try to use the internet to self diagnose yourself. Okay, thank you for listening. That's all I have.